For centuries, people believed the ancestry of Haitians was already well understood. But when scientists analyzed their DNA, they uncovered a story that almost no one expected. The results revealed exactly which African populations contributed the most to modern Haiti, how the brutal transatlantic slave trade shaped today's genetic landscape, and why some family histories don't match the DNA evidence. Today, we're following the science behind these discoveries to separate historical fact from popular myth. Stick around, because one DNA result near the end explains why Haiti's population is unlike almost any other in the Americas. This is Haitianism. Let's take a closer look. Most people think they already know the answer. Haiti came from West Africa, from Dahomey, from what is now Benin. It sounds obvious. Vodou, the African spirituality practiced there, is prevalent in Haiti. The cultural traces are everywhere, so the ancestors of Haitians must have come mostly from there. Except the records point somewhere else. Between the 17th and 18th centuries, France shipped hundreds of thousands of Africans to Saint-Domingue to work the sugar plantations. That part is familiar. The real question is harder and far more revealing. Among all the African peoples forced onto that island, who were the largest group, and which of them became the closest ancestors of Haitians today? For a long time, one method seemed convincing. The anthropologists looked at Vodou, old rituals, old names, and old spiritual forms. Many writers and ethnologists argued that because Vodou became such a dominant popular religion in Haiti, the people from the old kingdom of Dahomey, in present-day Benin, must have been the majority in Saint-Domingue. Since Vodou came from that region, the conclusion felt almost automatic. But that conclusion was wrong. The cultural imprint was real. The demographic assumption was not. The survival of Vodou did not mean the people of Dahomey were the most numerous. It meant something else was happening inside Saint-Domingue, something deeper than numbers alone. When historians trace the slave trade more closely, three major African zones begin to emerge behind the population of Saint-Domingue. The first was Senegambia, the region that includes present-day Senegal and Gambia, home to peoples such as the Wolof and others. The slave trade moved through places like Gorée Island near Dakar. But in Saint-Domingue, this group remained a minority. The second zone was larger and far more visible in Haitian cultural memory. West Africa, especially the Guinea coast and the Gulf of Benin. That included present-day Benin, the old kingdom of Dahomey, along with Togo, Ghana, and Nigeria. This was one of the great launching points of the Atlantic slave trade. Ships left from ports like Porto Novo and Ouidah. The traffic was so intense that European slavers gave the whole strip a brutal name, the Slave Coast. From that region came Fon, Yu, Yoruba, Arada, Nago, and others. Many seized through wars, raids, and internal conflicts, then held in coastal forts and markets before being sent to Saint-Domingue, the Antilles, Brazil, and Cuba. These peoples left a powerful mark on Haiti. They carried Vodou. They carried religious forms, sacred language, symbols, and practices that would survive the colonial era itself. And that is exactly why so many people assumed they were the majority. But they were not. The largest source was a different region entirely, one that left a quieter signature in popular memory, but a much heavier one in population. Central Africa. Congo-Angola, this third group surpassed the first two. It came from the old Kingdom of Congo and the wider Congo-Angola region, covering what is now the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the Republic of the Congo, and parts of Angola and Gabon. The people most often identified in this stream were Congo, also called Bakongo, a Bantu people with their own language, Kikongo, and their own spiritual and political world. And this changes the story, because if the peoples of Dahomey helped shape some of the most visible elements of Haitian culture, the people from Congo, Angola may have shaped the colony at an even more fundamental level through sheer numbers. Their presence was massive. Their influence ran through Saint-Domingue in ways that were not always as obvious as Vodou, but no less decisive. And once that becomes clear, the next question gets even bigger. If the Congo were so central, what exactly did they bring with them into Saint-Domingue? And how much of Haiti was built on that foundation? The answer was hiding in plain sight, in slave ship records, runaway notices, and sale documents. And when historians cross-check those archives from Saint-Domingue, one origin appears again and again, more than any other. Not Dahomey, not Senegambia. The Congo world. So if that one African region supplied a massive share of the enslaved people forced into Saint-Domingue, then that region did not just add bodies to the colony. It carried beliefs, military experience, spiritual systems, and a way of seeing freedom itself. And that means the story of Haiti does not begin only on the plantations. It begins much earlier, in Central Africa, inside the Kingdom of Congo and the ports that fed the Atlantic slave trade. By the 15th century, the Kingdom of Congo had already built ties with the Portuguese. Its royal family adopted Christianity early, making Congo one of the first African states to do so under European influence. But behind that religious connection was something far more brutal. The Portuguese were also among the first Europeans to organize large-scale slave trading networks in the region. And with the cooperation of Congo elites, those networks expanded fast. So when France needed labor for Saint-Domingue, it did not have to build a system from scratch. The machinery was already running. Capture routes were established. Sales were organized. Transport was constant. And two ports in present-day Angola, Luanda and Benguela, had become major export points for human beings. That mattered because French buyers were not choosing at random. They bought where supply was large, prices were lower, and shipping routes were efficient. The Congo region met all three conditions. Captives from that zone were cheaper. They were available in greater numbers. And the trade routes were already hardened by years of traffic across the Atlantic. Planters wanted volume. The Congo world could deliver it. And the supply kept growing for one reason above all: war. Internal conflicts across the Congo region produced enormous numbers of prisoners, and those prisoners were sold to European traders by the hundreds of thousands. Far more than in places like the Kingdom of Dahomey, in present-day Benin, where the state exercised tighter control over who left. In the Congo zone, the pipeline was wider, faster, and deadlier. Then came the colonial myth. French slaveholders convinced themselves that Congolese captives were especially suited for plantation labor, stronger, more resistant, more familiar with tropical agriculture. They also believed that because the Kingdom of Congo had been exposed to Christianity, these captives would be easier to control, more obedient, more submissive. That assumption would collapse, because the people they called Congos did not arrive in Saint-Domingue as blank slates waiting to be reshaped by the plantation. They brought their own spiritual world, their own memory, and their own understanding of power. The Christianity Europeans thought they recognized did not erase older systems. And those older systems would matter when the colony began to burn. The Congolese captives, who were among the largest African groups in Saint-Domingue, formed a huge part of the human base that later fed the Haitian Revolution. But numbers alone do not explain influence. That mattered just as much was what many of them carried with them: military habits, collective organization, and a culture that did not treat enslavement as normal. Many came from regions shaped by organized warfare and long combat experience. So when they reached Saint-Domingue, many did not simply endure. They regrouped. They fled into the mountains. They formed armed bands. Through marronage, they turned escape into resistance and resistance into strategy. Guerrilla warfare was not improvised from nothing. It was sharpened by people who already knew how to survive conflict. But the deepest challenge to slavery may have been spiritual. In the Congo world, slavery was not just hardship. It was a disorder, a break in the proper structure of existence, a violation that reached beyond the body. And behind that idea was a philosophical and spiritual system known as the Dikenga, sometimes called the Congo cosmogram. The symbol is simple, a circle crossed by a line. But inside that image is an entire vision of life. In Congo thought, existence does not move in a straight line from beginning to end. It moves in cycles: birth, life, death, and rebirth. These are not separate worlds sealed off from one another. They are phases of the same motion. At the center, the cross marks the boundary between two realms: the visible world of the living and the invisible world of the ancestors, the dead. But in this worldview, that boundary is not final. The dead do not disappear. They remain active. They protect. They guide. They intervene. People who believe the living and the dead remain linked face slavery with a different mental universe than the slaveholder. For them, captivity is not just political domination. It is a cosmic rupture. And if the world has been broken, then restoring it is not rebellion in the European sense. It is an obligation, which means the men and women dragged from Congo and Angola into Saint-Domingue may have arrived with something the colonists never measured correctly: a worldview in which freedom was part of the order of existence itself. And once that idea takes root inside a colony built on terror, the next step could only be revolution. For the people who rose up in Saint-Domingue, death was never the greatest threat. Slavery was. In the Congo worldview, being torn from your land, stripped of your name, cut off from your ancestors and your freedom was more than captivity. It was a spiritual death, a rupture of the soul. That is why liberty or death hit with such force during the Haitian Revolution. For many of the insurgents, especially those from the Congo world or shaped by its culture, this was a cosmic line that could not be crossed. To die fighting was a passage. To remain enslaved was annihilation. According to several sources cited by historian Jean Fouchard in Les Marrons de la Liberté, even before the ceremony at Bois Caïman, a Congo song had already become a rallying anthem among the rebels and at Vodou dance gatherings. That detail matters, because it shows the spiritual engine of the revolution was already moving before the event most people are taught to see as the beginning. The deeper you look, the clearer the pattern becomes. Haitian Vodou is often linked, rightly, to Benin, but its structure carries a massive Congo imprint, not Congolese in the modern national sense. Congo in the older sense, tied to the historic Kingdom of Congo and the wider Congo world. Night rituals, collective oaths, the use of powder. A whole range of practices found in Haitian Vodou trace back to that world. And that helps explain why the revolution in Haiti became so radical. This was not a revolt asking for better treatment. It was not a negotiation for softer chains. It moved toward the total destruction of slavery. Compared to many other slave uprisings, the Haitian Revolution was not only political, it was spiritual and social at the same time. For many of these Africans, especially the Congos, freedom was absolute. Push that idea one step further, and a bigger question appears. If Congo influence was so powerful, why did the peoples from Dahomey in present-day Benin leave such a strong mark on Haiti? Why did a minority manage to impose so much of its religious framework? The answer is more precise than it first sounds. The Dahomeans did not impose every part of Haitian culture. What they contributed most powerfully was a religious matrix, a framework. What is called Vodou in Haiti is not identical to what existed in Benin. It became something else in Saint-Domingue because it absorbed the spiritual traditions of multiple African peoples, then fused again under the pressure of colonial rule and Catholic domination. At its base, Vodou came from the kingdom of Dahomey, practiced by Fon, Arada, and Yoruba people deported to Saint-Domingue. The Congos had their own spiritual system, as we've seen. Those traditions did not remain separate for long. They collided, blended, adapted, and survived. Then another layer was forced onto them: Catholic symbols, saints, rituals, names. Out of that pressure came Haitian Vodou, not as a copy, but as a new creation. And here is why the Dahomean contribution became so central. At Saint-Domingue, people from present-day Benin brought a religion that was already highly structured. That structure mattered. It gave enslaved Africans from different nations a way to gather, organize, and hold ceremonies across ethnic lines. In other words, Vodou became a meeting ground. It helped unite nations that had arrived speaking different languages, carrying different gods, and remembering different homelands. That is one reason it endured. But there was another force shaping it, and it came from the colonists themselves. For control and out of deliberate ignorance, the colonists collapsed all African religions in Saint-Domingue into one label: Vodou. Congo, Yoruba, Dahomean. It made no difference to them. To recognize the distinctions would have meant recognizing identities. And recognizing identities risked recognizing organization. Organization meant resistance. So they flattened everything into a single vague category: easier to monitor, easier to fear, easier to punish. Since they already knew the term Vodou from Dahomey, they used it as a catch-all word for every non-Christian African spiritual practice on the island. Once everything was thrown into the same bag, it could all be described the same way: primitive, superstitious, dangerous, demonic. And that simplification did more than distort reality. It helped justify repression, bans, and violence, while hiding the real truth underneath: that these ceremonies were not just religion and not just memory. They were becoming infrastructure for revolt. The colonial system thought it had found the perfect shortcut: give every African religion one name, Vodou, and crush the differences into something easier to police. But that single word did the opposite. Instead of erasing belief, it built a hidden meeting ground. And inside Saint-Domingue, that mistake would help create something the colonists could no longer control. Men and women torn from the Congo, Dahomey, Yorubaland, and Senegambia did not arrive with one language, one god, or one ritual. They arrived divided by geography, memory, and tradition. But slavery forced them into the same nights, the same secrecy, the same danger. They had to pray together, gather together, survive together. What emerged was not the disappearance of African spirituality. It was a new common system, a shared religious space that could reconnect what the slave trade had deliberately scattered. To the colonists, it looked like superstition. To the enslaved, it became something far more dangerous. A shared language. Spiritual, yes, but political too. A language that could cross ethnic lines where ordinary speech could not. A language born in captivity, but capable of uniting people the plantation was designed to keep apart. And Saint-Domingue was never made of one population alone. The colony also held Europeans, mostly French, and from them came mixed descendants, the mulattoes. There were also Creoles, people of African descent born in the colony itself. Their numbers kept rising, not only through births in Saint-Domingue, but through the internal slave trade across the Caribbean. Creole slaves arrived from Curaçao, Jamaica, Cuba, even the Mississippi, and settled into the colony with the approval of an administration desperate for labor. They were concentrated in places where the need was sharpest. The South, where labor shortages kept planters anxious and slowed economic expansion, but also Port-au-Prince and Cap-Haïtien. Demographically, Africans remained overwhelmingly dominant in the making of the Haitian people. But the Creoles, though fewer, brought a different kind of influence, and that difference mattered. Because yes, Creoles were also African. But not in the same way as the Bossals, the newly arrived captives from Africa. Creoles were born inside the colony. From childhood, their world had already been shaped by the French language, Christian religion, plantation discipline, and the daily rules of the slave system. Many served as domestic workers or skilled slaves. Some worked in the workshops. They often stood closer to the colonial world than those who had just survived the Atlantic crossing. That closeness earned them a reputation. More docile, more assimilated, sometimes even accused of carrying the influence of the masters back into the enslaved population. Less rebellious than Africans newly deported. But that accusation hides the real question. How could they have been anything else? The Bossals arrived with living memory of another society. The Creoles had known only the plantation. They were no less African. But their African identity had already been transformed by colonial life. And then there were the survivors almost erased from the island's story. A small number of indigenous people, mainly Taínos, still remained in Saint-Domingue. Their numbers were low, but not zero. Some practiced marronage, some moved at the edges of colonial society. And because their physical appearance could sometimes allow them to claim freedom, they could slip past restrictions imposed on African slaves more easily than others. Over time, these indigenous survivors mixed quietly with African Maroons and with Métis populations, leaving a faint but real imprint on the local people being formed. Their presence carried a brutal reminder. Before Europeans arrived, the island had belonged entirely to indigenous nations. Their near destruction came through massacre, imported disease, forced labor, and the collapse of their world under colonization. So even if their demographic role in the formation of Haiti remained limited, they forced the timeline further back. Haiti's story did not begin with the Atlantic slave trade. It began after an older world had already been shattered. So when we ask what the Haitian people are, the answer is already more complicated than a single origin. The largest African group in Saint-Domingue came from the Congo region. That means Haitians are, in large part, descendants of Congo populations. After them came major populations from Dahomey, including Fon and Ewer, and from Yoruba land as well. Which means Haiti was never born from one people, one language, or one African culture. And that complexity is exactly where the next part of the story becomes impossible to ignore. The Haitian people were not simply transported into existence. They were made in collision, in suffering, in adaptation, and in struggle. A plural Africa, shattered and displaced, became the foundation of a new collective identity in Saint-Domingue. And from that invention of a people, the next chapter would change the Atlantic world forever.